Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, with patch 1.13 releasing earlier this morning, there's a bit of shifting going on among what weapons are considered good, which are great, and what are just the very best of the best. And while there is a ton of information to sort of sift through, sometimes you just want someone to tell you the simple truths. After 1.13 has taken effect, what are the best weapons available in the DLC? Meaning not including base game weapons, but we're literally just going to go through this very plainly and clearly. Before we start though, a quick honorable mention to the golem fist weapons. These had a melee hitbox added to their heavy attacks, which was really weird they didn't have before, and this has buffed them significantly, honestly. But sadly, not quite enough to make the top 10. They are quite good, but they aren't necessarily the best fist weapons overall. They just have their own unique niche, though surprisingly, they're not too far out of the top 10. The range of their projectiles is not very long, but the damage if you hit all the melees and projectiles is quite solid. It applies status relatively quickly too, and you can get multi-hit bonuses built up while doing this as well, which makes for an interesting bit of potential fun, but again, just not quite cracking the top 10. First up then, the most powerful without much of a doubt is Bloodfiend's Arm. This is an extremely high AR scaling colossal weapon that hits ridiculous amounts of bleed scaling, and on top of that also has a unique heavy attack combo that not only is faster than normal heavies, but also applies bonus bleed build up too. This thing is just sort of the carry stick of the expansion. If you are struggling, pick up this weapon. If you want to make any melee build work that can work around a colossal weapon, center it around this thing and it'll be unbelievably strong. Roll attack, sprint attack, jump attack, just charged heavies, whatever you want really. Just hit the enemy with this thing and they will die. They nerfed it in the patch before this one and it was still the strongest weapon after that, but they didn't touch it in this patch, so this one is pretty much just business as usual, really. Second strongest then is, well, actually different after the patch, and it's Euporia. This weapon has always been really interesting and special in a sort of conceptual way, but the main thing that made it what it is that as you hit enemies with the weapon, it builds up a holy aura with 2 stages. This both adds holy damage to the weapon, but also increases the effect of the weapon skill, and makes it fire out a holy laser beam as well. For reference, the reason that this was just a good weapon before, and not a great one, is just it took way too many hits to build up the holy aura. But now that build up has just been essentially cut in half, one solid combo will get you the first stage, a second combo for the second stage, and, well, the increase to holy damage on the stages not only make it much better as a stabbing stick, as it's now nearly doubled each bonus too, but it also seems to have had a ridiculous scaling effect on the unique weapon skill of this too. With, well, I mean, you're seeing the results on screen. I can tell you everything that you need to do to make this weapon do that yourself, but we have a full build video coming out on this in just a couple of hours after the release of this, if you want to check it out in more detail. Generally speaking, assume honestly that any of these that are here that are new because of the patch, we will probably be doing just a full build on it over the next few days. For now, just know that this thing is pretty undoubtedly in the top 3 weapons in the DLC, and the only reason that I put it below Bloodfiend's, honestly, is because Bloodfiend's is just very universal and simple. It applies to a few different styles of build rather than just one, and it takes zero real effort to make it strong, whereas Euporia sort of requires you to know what to do and how to use it. In third place, I've got Falx, which has seen an interesting marked improvement in the patch as well. This one was already one of the best new weapons in the DLC, paired curved swords with natural bleed on them. But because you can't put things like seppuku or bloodflame blade on it, you might think that they could fall behind other curved sword builds, but the trick to this one is entirely in its unique skill, a gap closing dash with a funky timed actual slash that catches people out in PvP, but more importantly, after the dash you can do a strong attack follow-up to do an absolute flurry of blows, which ends with a final hit that does the real bulk of the damage for the skill. You are pretty much guaranteed a bleed if you hit with all these hits, which raises the damage of this as well, but this activates all multi-hit bonuses that you can imagine before the final large pop of damage. The bleed happens before the final big hit too, and with that it just times itself so well to apply all buffs that you'd be building with this build, so simply by just using the weapon skill and knowing how to follow it up. The change in the patch then is quite simply that you can now adjust the direction of this horizontally after you've started it, rather than just sort of being stuck at the angle that you start the stabbing at. This makes it much more malleable and reliable, and simply just creates much less friction when you're actually using it. Then in fourth place we've got backhand blades, specifically due to the default Ash of War blind spot. This gives you massive invulnerability frames followed by a reasonably strong pierce damage attack. This was nerfed a bit in PvP, but this was not touched for PvE at all. The real trick to this weapon's strength then is a mix of incredibly high dexterity scaling, very low weight cost for essentially 2 weapons, a fast moveset in general, but then the skill on top of that too. With this you can run statuses and multi-hit bonuses, do regular attack combos, sprint attacks, or jump attacks, and then when an attack is about to hit you, Instead of dodging it, you press blind spot to avoid all damage, and the follow-up hits will not only still have any multi-hit bonuses activated, but importantly, because it is pierce damage, it will activate the game's counterattack mechanic, which increases the pierce damage that you deal to enemies that are mid-attack animation. The whole point of the skill is to dodge attacks with it, so you will almost always get that just sort of as an overlap as a default part of the playstyle, hitting an enemy mid-attack. It's simple, but it's effective as all hell, and honestly it's quite fun to play if you've never actually tried this yourself. In fifth, I have something that could arguably be in the top 3, really, but I chose to value comfort and consistency over raw output because this is a bit of a dangerous playstyle. But, well, let's just say that the Rakshasa greatsword has gotten slightly stronger now that it has gotten a speed increase to its actual weapon skill hits. It didn't seem like it was that much at first, but as an unending cast Ash of War that only ends when you run out of stamina or FP, it scales really well with successive hit bonuses, and it's important to remember whenever damage numbers are changed on something that benefits from multi-hit bonuses like this, it will scale up a very surprising amount when everything is all sort of stuck together like this in this footage. And as you can see, this is actually now just sort of obliterating things. It's not necessarily faster at building these bonuses than the other new unending skill weapons, but it has high base damage for the weapon, good scaling as well, bleed buildup, and now it is just fast enough to tip it over the edge of being decent into being in the very top tier of powerful weapons in the blink of an eye from this patch, especially with the natural bonus poise that you get from the skill too, feeding into it quite well conceptually. Sixth up then, we've got what used to be the old number 2, which is Claws of Night. These got hit with a slight nerf in the patch today, specifically in the form of a bug fix that changed the way that physical attack scales with the unique skill itself a touch, and from having tested this myself and comparing it to the exact same build before the patch, what you've been watching here is Rolana with this build before the patch, and now you'll see this after the patch, recorded just a couple hours ago. The damage at longer range seems to have been reduced, which does actually remove some of the comfort factor too, and that's why I put it down a little bit compared to its old position in the top 3, but the damage for the most part seems actually extremely similar to me, at least on PC. I don't know if it maybe changed on console, but as long as you're using the skill at proper shotgun range, as you probably should be anyways, it will still do pretty comparable damage, and then you can still poke with it from range just to keep multi-hit buffs active too, and things like that. Seventh, then, we have one of my personal favorite weapons in the DLC that has now been elevated by the patch itself, Red Bear's Claw. This is one of the only 2 Beast Claw weapons in the game, a paired aggressive claw playstyle, and this is pretty solid strength scaling along with natural bleed buildup on the weapon, which pairs well with its fast hits and actually its unique skill, Red Bear Hunt. This is a 3-hit combo of mauling slashes, each followed by a ton of sort of phantom follow-up strikes. These strikes also apply multi-hit bonuses as they build up if they hit enemies, they apply smaller amounts of bleed buildup too, and so the skill clearly, like the falx, has a lot of natural potential as a weapon. But before today's patch, they just sort of weren't tuned quite high enough. They were a solid weapon for sure, they were pretty good, but they weren't quite worthy of being on a list like this until today's changes, which not only made the skill usage grant bonus poise, which is actually really good for getting longer combos off with it, and a lot of the DLC weapons struggle from not having poise, but also just increasing the damage of the skill in general, which has been increased by an honestly quite staggering amount, similar to the last weapon because of the multi-hit bonuses stacking up on top of the damage increases. And actually, if you want to see a full setup for this one, we have a full build coming out for this weapon quite soon too, where we'll get to have some roaring fun with the buffed bear Roar Incant 2, which actually does do damage now. Eighth up then, the Death Knight's Longhaft Axe. The weapon itself scales quite well as far as the actual damage numbers that it does, and while this doesn't do the craziest damage of a weapon skill in the DLC compared to some other things on this list, it does still do pretty good damage. It starts with an invulnerability dash, which is really good in itself, that you can time to create openings that you wouldn't otherwise be able to use, and you have insane hyper armor for the follow-up leaping strong attack if an enemy hits you in it. The comfort and adaptability that the skill gives you is incredibly strong. The poise is great for trading, and the damage is high enough to make these trades worth doing, as again the weapon is just sort of solid as a whole even from its base underneath the skill itself. Ninth then is the Fire Knight Greatsword. This thing is honestly just incredibly impressive in itself. It's a colossal sword, physical and fire damage as a base, but able to have further weapon buffs infused onto it, such as using things like Messmer Flame Ashes of War. The best heavy attack moveset for a big sword is on this, the Heavy Thrusts, and the best light attack moveset for a big sword is also on this too, which is the Godslayer Greatsword, which gives you just sort of a true combo with light attacks against players, just because of how fast the animations are from attack to attack. This is just an incredibly solid all-around weapon. It has a lot going for it, and it's very malleable because it's infusible with Ashes of War, and it wasn't changed in the slightest by the patch. Then finally, in 10th place, I put the Horned Warrior Greatsword, newly anointed with this patch, with an absolutely insane damage buff to the skill itself. This weapon as a whole is pretty decent, but the skill is the best part of it. And this used to be just sort of okay, but now it is actually really capable. One of the bigger buffs of the patch as far as offensive gains, and with all buffs running in a proper setup built around this sword, if you can manage to hit every hit of the weapon skill, you can get to nearly 14,000 damage in one cast, which is nutty as far as pure offense goes in comparison to most weapon skills in the game. This is accomplished with multi-hit boosts and general damage boosts, and as mentioned earlier, the second that you change a damage number on something affected by multi-hit, it always has the potential to scale to the moon once you put a full build together around it, and this one has been one of the recipients of those types of things. The only real negative to this then, and the reason that it's down here, is quite simply that it doesn't give you hyper armor, no bonus poise, so it's really actually hard to find large enough openings to use every input of the skill without having to stop. But honestly, even half usages, only a couple of swings, are still very large pops of damage that you can get out much quicker, so really, this thing does belong in the top 10 no matter what, but while it is offensively incredibly capable, pure comfort and consistency is why I've had it here just right on the edge. That just about does it for today then, everyone, and honestly, I think it's quite exciting that 4 of these weapons on this list were not on it before the patch, and quite a number of the rest of them have also actually changed in some way, shape, or form as well. I hope you've enjoyed this then, and may it offer inspiration for your continued journey in the Shadow of the Erdtree. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.